What if everything that you thought you knew about aliens and UFOs was just scratching the surface? Prepare to have your minds blown as we dive into three, count them, three, 1, 2, 3, perplexing and unexplainable UFO encounters. From interdimensional visitors to energy-sapping spacecraft, these stories will make you question the very nature of our own reality. Are we alone in the universe? Or are otherworldly beings already walking among us? Buckle up and prepare to journey into the unknown. I'm Johnny and this is the Oddest, and these are the UFO stories they didn't want you to hear. Imagine driving down a lonely Australian road when suddenly your worst nightmare becomes a reality. This is the true story of Grace Askew, whose ordinary life was forever changed by a series of chilling extraterrestrial encounters. From a terrifying car chase to an alien presence in her own home, Grace's experience will make you question everything you thought you knew about our place in this universe. So buckle up as we dive into one of Australia's most compelling UFO cases that continues to baffle experts to this day. Grace Askew's UFO experiences might not be widely known outside of Australia, but they share fascinating details with many other UFO cases. The first incident happened when Grace was driving down a deserted road one night. A strange object seemed to follow her car, eventually getting very close and hovering right above it. Later, a mysterious non-human creature was spotted as the object continued to follow her vehicle. Even more unsettling than that, the apparent alien presence reappeared a few weeks later, this time inside the family home.
Before this happened to me, I can be honest, I could say that I was in that category of being naive. I didn't believe it. I didn't really believe it because I had to see. It's like I would have to see it with my own eyes. It's when I got a bit further down the hill that I noticed on the right-hand side of me some long, oblong-shaped lights. I didn't know what they were. I mean, I only sort of caught a glimpse of a bright orange light sort of shining through.
Shortly after, a UFO identical to the one seen earlier was spotted hovering directly over their house. These events hint at something more deliberate than a random encounter on a country road. What exactly transpired during that 2-week period in the mid-90s in Victoria, Australia is still largely unknown. So, one night in 1994, Grace Askew was driving through Bacchus Marsh in Victoria, Australia, when she spotted a strange row of orange lights up in the distance. Unsure of what they were, she quickly realised that they were definitely something unusual. She watched the lights for a few seconds before continuing on her drive, eventually turning onto a back road leading to the main freeway. As they were driving, one of the passengers noticed a blue-white light moving independently, separate from the original row of orange lights. Grace happened to glance across at the light for a wee moment, and one of her passengers suggested that it might actually be a UFO. Initially, she dismissed this idea as just being ridiculous and tried to put the strange sighting out of her mind. However, a few moments later, her daughters began to insist that something was definitely following them, something that looked like truck headlights. When Grace checked her rearview mirror, she saw a bright light moving quickly towards the vehicle. She would later go on to describe this object as orange like a sunset, stretching across the entire road. Alarmed, Grace pressed harder on the gas pedal and sped towards the nearest town. They finally pulled into a parking lot in the town square. When they got out of the car and looked back, they saw what appeared to be a spacecraft hovering overhead. Grace would later describe this as something not of this world.
I heard Victoria and one of the other girls in the back there, they were commenting on something that was behind us. They actually thought somebody was coming up behind us like a truck or something because it was moving fairly fast and very bright. It was just such a bright as blinding light. It was orange like a sunset and it was just spanning across the road. I got really scared. I said to Grace, quick, just step on it.
A moment later, the object moved over the road and positioned itself directly above the two witnesses. From this vantage point, they could clearly see the orange lights along its edges, the same ones that had initially caught Grace's attention, as well as a series of bright white lights underneath. They watched in awe and fear as the object slowly moved past them, and disappeared into a nearby gully. To say the two women were terrified would be an understatement. Grace even confessed that for the first time in her entire life she felt a genuine fear that she might not survive this encounter. They eventually got back into the car and went to set out on their journey once more. However, as they approached the exit of the parking lot, they noticed several strange blue-white lights moving across the sky. They continued on their way, but these lights remained in sight. In fact, at one point, they were so blinding that their eyes hurt to even look anywhere near it. They decided again to pull into the next driveway, hoping to find some safety. But as they did, Grace saw something that terrified her even more than anything else. Emerging from this blinding light was a figure moving towards her. She later described it as looking like a typical grey alien, emphasising that it was definitely not human, and that she definitely felt threatened by its presence. At that exact moment, more intensely than ever, Grace feared that she might not see her family again. In a rush of clarity, Grace started the car and sped away from the driveway. Although they eventually made it home, the sense of safety that they had once felt, well, it never fully returned. Grace wasn't the only one who had to grapple with this bizarre event. Her husband Steve found it challenging to accept her story. He openly admitted that he just simply didn't believe her, mainly because he had never experienced anything like that himself, and was convinced that there must be some other normal explanation. Despite his skepticism, Steve kept these doubts to himself at the time, and he fully supported his wife. However, about 2 weeks later, his doubts were soon shattered. One evening, while the family was at home, Grace and Steve were awakened by the distressed cries of their teenage son. When they rushed to his room to see what was going on, he told them that there had been some sort of presence in his room. Even more intriguing, their son kept asking if they could hear something, while pointing towards the ceiling. When they listened closely, both Grace and Steve could hear, indeed, a low humming sound coming from above. As soon as Grace recognised this noise, she realised that it was the same sound that she heard 2 weeks earlier during the strange incident that she had on the road. After checking the room thoroughly and calming down the son, Grace and Steve went back to bed. However, Grace couldn't sleep. She lay there, unsure of what to do next. Should she just hope that whatever was above their house and whoever had been in her son's room would simply leave? Or should she muster the courage to look outside with Steve and confirm what they kind of already suspected?
I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. When you see an object that's just sort of floating through the air, like at slow pace, and you think to yourself, oh my God, it struck me as, being awesome. It's just something unbelievable.
It was a relief that he was able to see this thing, and all I kept saying was that was the thing that was there the night when I was with the others.
Grace and Steve went to the window and cautiously looked outside. There, right in front of them, was exactly the same object that Grace had witnessed 2 weeks earlier on the road. Steve would later recall his shock and utter disbelief as he watched this object move through the air right in front of them. As Stephen looked on, Grace told him several times, perhaps not quite being able to believe it herself, that this was the same object that she had witnessed while she had been driving along the quiet back roads. Steve would later state that everything about the object, from its appearance to how it moved, suggested that it wasn't technology from this planet. Despite their unsettling experiences, Steve and Grace were eager to move on with their lives, although Steve seemed more willing to let it all go. He said that he was content not having any sort of explanation for what he saw. Grace, however, well, she felt less at ease. She admitted to feeling a lingering fear, not only of the unknown nature of what they had seen, but also the possibility that they might return. This raises a question. Was the presence that the son felt in his room the same creature that Grace saw in the driveway that night? Or was it just something similar? And if it was, why had they returned specifically to Grace's house? It's easy to think of Grace Askew and her family's UFO encounters as just two separate sightings that happened 2 weeks apart. However, the fact that something seemed to be in their son's bedroom during the second incident, along with Grace's sighting of a strange creature in the driveway during her first encounter, well, that suggests that these experiences might be connected somehow and be more significant. Even though there were no obvious signs of alien abduction, such as missing time or physical markings on their body, it seems that Grace and her family have attracted some kind of attention. It's worth noting that in many cases of alien abduction, these events often occur repeatedly and over many years, sometimes decades, and sometimes involving other family members. Could there have been abductions or encounters that Grace and her family just simply weren't aware of? Or perhaps Grace prefers not to remember? This case is certainly intriguing, and it aligns well with other strange encounters reported in Australia and around the world. Are these sightings just random, one-off events? Or are they part of something more coordinated and pre-planned? The questions keep piling up, while answers, well, they remain out of reach. It just adds to the mystery surrounding these types of experiences. What if the aliens we've been searching for in the vastness of space are actually much closer than we think? Imagine a world where visitors from other dimensions walk among us, slipping through the cracks of reality. In this story, we're going to explore mind-bending encounters that challenge our understanding of the universe and ask the simple question, are we alone? Or are we just not looking in the right places? Many people think that aliens might actually be visitors from other dimensions instead of other planets or outer space. As we learn more about the science behind these other dimensions, which many mainstream scientists now believe are real, the strange stories from years ago, well, they start to make a bit of sense. Even declassified FBI files mention that visitors might come from other dimensions. Not every UFO sighting is just about lights in the sky, flying saucers, or strange medical examinations or probes. Some encounters are much more complex and go beyond what even the most imaginative thinkers can grasp. We still don't know if these dimensions run parallel to our own timeline, or if they exist on a completely different time. However, there are growing, although indirect, evidence that these other dimensions are real. If this turns out to be true, then interactions between various dimensions might have been happening for a very long time. Could these visitors even be humans, travelling through dimensions to our distant past, which is currently our present? In September of 1979, a long-haul truck driver called Harry Turner woke up suddenly in his truck that was parked in the parking lot. The strange thing was, though, he had no memory of how he actually got there. As he sat there thinking, how did I get here? He noticed his handgun beside him and the empty shells of all 8 rounds. That triggered his memory, and suddenly the whole episode came rushing back to him. See, he had been driving on the highway from Winchester to Fredericksburg in Virginia. While alone on the road, a strange bright light quickly approached his truck. Suddenly, the truck was surrounded by this strange white light. With the steering wheel no longer responding, Turner sat in his seat trying to figure out what the hell to do next. Then, the truck cabin door flew open and he felt a strong, unpleasant pressure on his shoulders, as if someone or something was forcibly holding him down. Panicked, he raised his handgun and fired all 8 rounds in rapid succession. The pressure on his shoulder suddenly eased up, but overwhelmed by fear and confusion, he lost consciousness. The next thing that he knew, he woke up in the warehouse parking lot. His wristwatch showed that it was just after 11 PM, but the clock on the warehouse wall said it was 3 AM. When he examined his truck, he discovered something strange. Despite supposedly completing an 80-mile trip, his truck's odometer showed that he had only travelled 17 miles. After the incident, Turner started having even more strange and more intriguing experiences. One night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he suddenly realised that he could see through it. He could actually see through the solid mass that was the ceiling. He could see the night sky and the stars above. Even more frightening, when he looked at his wife sleeping beside him, he could see her skeleton and internal organs. It was as if her skin had become translucent, or as if he suddenly had some X-ray vision. Turner became absolutely convinced that his new abilities were somehow connected to his experience that night on the highway. As time passed, more memories of that night started to return to him. For reasons that he couldn't explain, he became aware of a star system called Alpha Centauri. Interestingly, other abductees throughout history have mentioned this part of the universe as well. His captors were dressed all in white, resembling doctors, and even more bizarre, they had numbers written on their heads. Convinced that he and his truck had entered an interdimensional portal, he referred to these beings as ultra-terrestrials. However, Turner became increasingly withdrawn, exhibiting strange behaviour and struggling with suicidal thoughts. Animals also started to behave strangely whenever he was around them. At one point, while chasing one of these creatures, he became the centre of a cross-state police chase. He's believed to have since passed away. There isn't much else written about this Harry Turner incident, which some investigators find odd, especially considering his bold public claims. Given his background as a former Navy serviceman, his lack of information, well, it raises suspicions about possible government involvement. The year before Turner's incident, a family of 5 in the United Kingdom had a very similar experience whilst travelling on the motorway. In the evening of June 19th of 1978, John and Gloria Mann, their 2 children and their Aunt Frances were on their way back home. They were driving a route that they knew well and had taken many times before. After leaving Reading at 9:30 p.m. and being 30 minutes into their 90-minute journey to Brockworth, they noticed an extremely bright light ahead of them. They followed this light for a couple of miles before John pulled the car over to investigate what was going on. He heard a swishing sound and a noise similar to train wheels against the track. His wife pleads for him then to get back into the car, and this snapped him out of a strange trance that he seemed to be in. As this light got closer, he jumped back into the car and sped away just as fast as he could. Shortly after this, John realised that he wasn't in control of the car at all. They seemed to be on a strange road that zigzagged wildly with tall hedges on either side engulfing the vehicle. The next thing they knew, they were passing a "Welcome to Farringdon" sign, suddenly much closer to their destination. By the time they arrived home, it was just after midnight. They couldn't account for almost 2 hours of their travel time, leaving them puzzled and shaken. In the days that followed, the Mann's family and Aunt Frances noticed strange bruises appearing on their bodies, especially behind their right knee. They also developed a bothersome inflamed heat rash. Determined to figure out what had happened, John tried to find this mysterious zigzag in the road that they had turned onto that night. He spent hours driving around, going back and forth trying to retrace their route, but no matter how hard he tried, he simply couldn't find it. The situation took a more serious turn when their young daughter Natasha started having intense nightmares about that strange night. Worried and desperate for answers, the Manns decided to seek professional help. They turned to Jeffrey McCartney, a hypnotherapist, hoping that hypnotic regression might reveal what actually happened to them that night. Each family member shared surprisingly similar stories, even little Natasha, who gave her account separately and without hypnosis. According to their descriptions, they had all exited the car and found themselves walking in a strange mist. Suddenly, a craft appeared and guided them into these beams of light. They described encountering a race of beings who had fled their dying planet and were searching for a new home, offering advanced technology in exchange. The accounts grew even more bizarre as they spoke of travelling through a portal from the mothership. They also recalled drinking colourless fizzy drinks, and then this made them forget about the encounter entirely. Their alien hosts had feared that if they remembered their experience, then it might be exploited. Could their car have entered a portal that transported them to another part of the universe and onto a mothership? It's worth mentioning that all the doctors and UFO investigators who looked into their case found that the witnesses were incredibly credible. They believed that this family were unlikely to have simply made up this story. Over 3 decades after the encounter of Harry Turner and the Mann's family, a similar incident happened in New Hampshire, but this time there was tangible evidence of the strange activity. Two local teenagers were sitting in a parked car when they noticed a strange light darting around in the distant sky. Within seconds, the distant light zoomed in and appeared right in front of the car. Suddenly, a bizarre beam of light shot from the intensely lit object and struck the vehicle, rendering it useless. No matter how hard they tried to drive away, the electrics failed. The wheels just spun, helplessly, as if they were stuck in the mud. Then the car began to lift off the ground, caught in what seemed to be some sort of tractor beam. Both teenagers could see each other screaming in terror, but they later recalled that the entire place was silent. They couldn't actually hear the screams. They later said that it was as if someone pressed the mute button on reality. As the situation became even more surreal, the 16-year-old boy heard a strange voice in his head saying, "Don't panic, don't be afraid." He actually said that this voice reassured him. Suddenly the car horn blared and the vehicle crashed to the ground from several feet up in the air. Without wasting a moment, they sped away from the site, heading straight for the 18-year-old girl's home. After they hurriedly told their parents what had happened, the police were notified and an officer came to interview them. At first, their claims weren't taken seriously at all. However, when officers visited the site where the young couple said that their car had lifted up off the ground, they found clear indentations matching the wheels of a standard car, as if it had fallen from a significant height. While these officers weren't convinced by every detail of their story, they had to admit that something strange had indeed happened that night. Furthermore, although the car's exterior showed no physical damage, the underside, well, that was a different story. Upon inspection, it was found that about £5,000 worth of repairs were needed. This further supported the account that the car had been lifted up off the ground and then dropped from a significant height. Had these two teenagers become entangled in some kind of wormhole? Could they have been transported somewhere and then returned with their memories still locked away? More importantly, would the wider world ever find out about it? Perhaps those involved wouldn't want to talk about it further, even if someone were willing to take them seriously. So I know technically the last story had various smaller stories inside of it, but we'll count that as one story because it was all about portals. So, on to the third and final story.
1973, 42 years ago. The wife was in the hospital, and I went and visited her and come home, and after a long day's work at Inco and going to the hospital and that I came home. And when I got home, tired and everything, I went straight to bed. It was about 9 or 10 o'clock. I had to work in the morning. My tenant next door, about approximately 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, came over and nearly knocked the door down, trying to wake me up, and yelling, and I thought there was something wrong, so I got up and seen, and he told me, he said, "You have to come outside and see what's in the pole line." And I told him, I said, "Listen, it's late, I'm tired, I gotta go to bed." I said, "It's the moon." He said, "You have to come, or you have to come." So I went out and witnessed with him this big, humongous, bright as a light bulb, like when you see a light bulb, and the size of the complete width of the pole line, the hydro line at the back of the house. And there was a wire leading from it onto the power line. You could see it was taking power. I couldn't see the machine itself, but you could see it was all in glow. It was one of the most spectacular scenes I've seen in my life, one I'll never forget anyway, and I can thank my neighbor for that. But I went to the neighbors the next morning and I told them about it, and she told me I should have woke her up and brought her there. And I told her, well, there was so much excitement going on at the spur of the moment, I didn't even think of it. But she had told me that she had seen, she had waken up approximately that time, and she had seen that everything was lit up in the house. She figured that the kids had left the lights on. But, lo and behold, it wasn't the lights, it was this UFO or whatever it was over a power line that created that light. And many, many years ago, my mom had mentioned something that she'd seen, UFO, a flying saucer, she had called it, and she drew me the picture with all little windows all around it, and she said it hovered over the trees, and all she had time to do is grab the two kids, run into the house, and she was very terrified. But this one here, I didn't see no little windows, all I seen was a bright light. Everything was lit up, and it's only by Kokigami Lake over the power lines there, right? So that's about it.
One night in 1973 in Ontario, Canada, Art Larrabee was abruptly awakened and found himself face to face with an astonishing experience. He saw a strange craft that seemed to be from another world, hovering near the power lines outside of his house. What made this sight even more bizarre though, was the craft appeared to be drawing energy directly from the power lines below it. Interestingly, this wasn't the first time that someone in Art's family had witnessed something unusual. His mother also had a similar encounter when Art was just a young boy. Whether these two incidents are connected, well, that's still up for debate. This story isn't widely known, even among UFO enthusiasts, possibly because it happened during one of the most active periods of UFO sightings in history. Nonetheless, it adds another layer of the ongoing mystery surrounding UFOs and aliens. It turned out that Art's mother had also witnessed a very similar object many years ago, which she always referred to as a flying saucer. She even showed Art a drawing that she had made of this object depicting a disc-shaped craft with little windows all around it. Because of his mother's earlier sighting, Art didn't find the 1973 experience to be life-changing. Despite how bizarre and exciting that it was, he had always been aware of such possibilities thanks to his mother's own accounts. However, seeing it for himself, well, that made a significant impact. While he had always been open to the idea, after witnessing it firsthand, Art became a true believer in the existence of such phenomena. If we consider the possibility of a deeper connection between Art's sighting in 1973 and his mother's encounter decades earlier, it raises an interesting question. Perhaps Art's acceptance of these phenomena wasn't just due to his mother's stories. Could it be that the focus of his mother's encounter was actually on Art himself? It's worth noting that during her sighting, his mother's primary concern was to get her children to safety. While this was a perfectly natural reaction to the unusual situation, it makes one wonder if there was more to this encounter than just a simple sighting. While it's a tentative connection, it's worth noting that many reported cases of alien abduction span multiple generations. In these cases, abductees often discover that their children are experiencing similar events, and that their parents had similar encounters years earlier. It's unlikely that new information will emerge about Art Larrabee's sighting unless there's some sort of sudden revelation. This might be because there's simply nothing more to uncover, and that the event was just a one-time random occurrence. However, it's important to keep the possibility in mind as we consider the broader patterns and mysteries surrounding each experience. Art Larrabee's encounter might not be one of the most dramatic UFO sightings on record, but it remains intriguing for several reasons. One of the most notable details is that the object seemed to be drawing power from the power lines below. Surprisingly, there were more encounters like this than many might realise. For instance, numerous reports describe otherworldly craft hovering over power lines. In other cases, witnesses have seen these strange objects near power and energy plants, including nuclear facilities. There have even been sightings of UFOs hovering over water towers. A common thread in these encounters is the consistent report of the objects seemingly extracting whatever it is, whether it be energy or water, suggesting a specific interest or need for these elements. Could these potentially otherworldly objects actually be using our own power systems for their own purposes? If so, then that raises the possibility that these seemingly advanced vehicles might share more similarities with our own technology than we first realised. At the very least, it suggests that they may rely on our energy sources while operating on our planet. Art Larrabee's sighting, along with many similar ones, adds another layer of intrigue and mystery to the already complex topic of UFOs and extraterrestrial encounters. This idea changes our understanding and prompts us to consider the possibility that these mysterious objects might be interacting with our world in ways we haven't fully grasped yet. As we conclude our wee journey through these mind-bending stories, it's natural to feel a mix of wonder and scepticism. While we should approach these stories with a critical eye, it's hard to deny that something truly extraordinary is happening in our skies and beyond. Our fascination with the unknown is a testament to the human spirit and our insatiable curiosity and desire to explore these mysteries of the universe. Whether these encounters are interdimensional, extraterrestrial, or something that we have yet to comprehend, they remind us of the vast potential for discovery that still exists. So, keep your minds open, your eyes to the skies, and remember, the truth is out there, just waiting for us to find it. Until next time, take care of yourselves out there. Tell someone that you love them, and remember, no matter what, keep smiling.